For most of your adult life, you believed you understood yourself. You thought you knew why you procrastinated, why you avoided difficult conversations, why you stayed awake scrolling on your phone long after midnight even when you had work the next morning. You blamed stress. You blamed exhaustion. Sometimes you blamed other people. But deep down, your life always carried a quiet feeling of repetition. The same habits, the same frustrations, the same promises to change starting Monday. Every few months, you suddenly became motivated. You bought productivity books, reorganized your room, created detailed plans about becoming healthier, calmer, more disciplined. For 2 or 3 days, you felt completely in control again. Then life slowly returned to normal. Late night scrolling, avoiding responsibilities, constant distraction. And the strange part was that you were not lazy. People around you often described you as thoughtful and intelligent. Friends came to you for advice because you listened carefully and understood emotions well. But when it came to your own life, you felt strangely disconnected from yourself. One night, after spending hours switching between apps, videos, and random internet searches, you suddenly looked up and noticed how silent your apartment had become. No music, no notifications, no stimulation. And for the first time in a long while, silence felt uncomfortable, almost frightening. That moment stayed in your mind longer than expected, because somewhere deep inside, you realized something unsettling. Maybe distraction was not the real problem. Maybe distraction was preventing you from seeing the real problem. A few days later, you tried something unusual. Instead of trying to immediately fix your life again, you simply started observing yourself. Not emotionally, not judgmentally, objectively, almost like watching another person. You noticed how quickly you reached for your phone whenever uncomfortable thoughts appeared. You noticed how defensive you became during criticism, even mild criticism. You noticed how often you said you were too tired, when the truth was that you simply wanted to avoid difficult tasks. For the first time, you stopped automatically believing every excuse your mind created. And honestly, that realization felt uncomfortable. Because you had always considered yourself self-aware. But real self-awareness felt very different from simply thinking about yourself constantly. Real awareness required honesty. One afternoon at work, your manager gave small feedback about a project you had completed. Nothing dramatic, just a few suggestions. Normally, you would spend hours mentally defending yourself afterward. But this time, you watched your reaction carefully. The tightness in your chest, the immediate urge to explain yourself, the embarrassment hiding underneath the defensiveness. That was the moment you realized something important. Most emotional reactions happen automatically long before people consciously understand them. And once you started observing those reactions calmly instead of immediately obeying them, you began seeing patterns everywhere. The hardest realization arrived a few weeks later. You discovered you were not nearly as emotionally above things as you liked to believe. One evening, while scrolling through social media, you saw an old friend announcing a major promotion. Beautiful office, expensive suit, hundreds of congratulatory comments, and instantly, something inside you tightened. At first, you ignored it, but later that night, you forced yourself to examine the emotion honestly. It was jealousy, not hatred, not bitterness, just the uncomfortable feeling that someone else seemed further ahead in life than you were. That realization embarrassed you deeply. You had always viewed jealousy as something immature people experienced. You thought emotionally mature adults naturally celebrated everyone else's success without struggle. But now, you saw something different. Suppressing uncomfortable emotions does not remove them. It only pushes them deeper underground where they quietly influence behavior anyway. And once you admitted the truth, something strange happened. The emotion lost some of its power. You no longer needed to pretend you were above insecurity. You simply accepted that insecurity was sometimes part of being human. Gradually, you started noticing other uncomfortable patterns too. Your need for validation, your fear of failure, your tendency to avoid situations where you might look inexperienced. None of those realizations made you hate yourself. If anything, they made you calmer, because honesty removes confusion. For years, you believed your biggest problem was lack of confidence. But eventually you realized the deeper issue was ego, not arrogance in the obvious sense, something quieter than that. Your ego constantly tried protecting you from discomfort. It told you not to ask questions during meetings because you might sound unintelligent. It convinced you not to apply for opportunities unless you felt completely ready. It pushed you toward perfectionism because perfection felt safer than vulnerability. At first, you thought ego only appeared in loud, arrogant people. But sometimes ego appears as avoidance. The need to protect an image of competence, the need to avoid embarrassment, the need to appear composed even while struggling internally. One afternoon during a meeting, a coworker explained a concept you only partially understood. Normally, you would nod silently and pretend everything made sense. Later, you would secretly search explanations online. But this time you interrupted politely. Can you explain that part again? The room stayed quiet for half a second. Then, your coworker smiled and explained it more clearly. Nothing terrible happened. Nobody judged you. Nobody mocked you. And strangely, you felt lighter afterward. Because for the first time in years, you prioritized learning over protecting your image. That small moment changed something important inside you. You started realizing growth often begins exactly where the ego wants to run away. You used to imagine transformation dramatically. You thought changing your life meant waking up one morning with perfect discipline and endless motivation. Reality felt much quieter than that. Instead of rebuilding your entire life overnight, you started focusing on extremely small actions. Cleaning one section of your apartment, reading 10 pages before bed instead of scrolling endlessly, going for short walks after work without listening to anything. At first, those actions felt almost meaningless. But slowly, something subtle started changing. You trusted yourself slightly more. Not because your life suddenly became impressive, but because you slowly stopped breaking promises to yourself every single day. And psychologically, that mattered. For years, you had unknowingly trained your brain to expect inconsistency. Plans disappeared quickly. Motivation faded fast. Goals rarely lasted. Now you were building a different pattern, not intensity, consistency. That difference changed everything. Months passed, and you noticed something strange. Small, repeated actions improved your emotional stability more than dramatic bursts of motivation ever had. Your apartment felt calmer, your mind felt quieter. Even difficult responsibilities felt less emotionally overwhelming. For the first time, change felt sustainable. Before this chapter of your life, you believed confidence was a feeling, something people either naturally possessed or permanently lacked. But gradually, you discovered something different. Real confidence felt quieter. It was not loud certainty. It was self-trust. Every time you handled discomfort instead of escaping it, your nervous system adapted slightly. Every difficult conversation you stopped avoiding made future conversations feel less frightening. Every responsibility you followed through on built evidence that you could rely on yourself. And that evidence mattered far more than positive affirmations ever had. One Saturday morning, you attended a networking event you normally would have avoided completely. During the first hour, you felt awkward. Some conversations felt clumsy. At times, you struggled to know what to say. But instead of attacking yourself afterward, you focused on one simple fact. You showed up. That mattered. For years, you assumed confident people never felt uncomfortable. Now you understood something completely different. Confident people often feel discomfort too. They simply stop treating discomfort like danger. That realization slowly changed the way you move through the world. Not dramatically, not instantly, but steadily. As your self-awareness grew, one truth became impossible to ignore. You had spent years avoiding silence. Whenever uncomfortable emotions appeared, you distracted yourself immediately. Videos, music, social media, constant stimulation. At first, those habits felt harmless. But eventually you recognized something deeper. Distraction protected you from self-confrontation. Silence, forced awareness. And awareness revealed things you had avoided for years. Loneliness, uncertainty, emotional exhaustion, fear about the future. One evening, you left your phone in another room and sat quietly for nearly 20 minutes. The experience felt strangely intense. Your thoughts raced. Old insecurities surfaced. Unfinished emotions returned. But beneath the discomfort, you noticed something surprising. The emotions were not destroying you. You had simply spent years running from them automatically. That realization changed your relationship with discomfort completely. You started understanding that emotional maturity was not about always feeling calm. It was about staying present long enough to understand what you were actually feeling instead of instantly escaping it. And slowly, silence became less frightening. Sometimes it even became peaceful. The biggest transformation in your life did not happen through inspiration. It happened through responsibility, small responsibilities, repeated consistently, paying bills on time, keeping commitments, maintaining routines, having honest conversations instead of avoiding them. None of those actions felt dramatic individually, but together they slowly reshaped your identity. A year earlier, you often felt mentally scattered and emotionally reactive. Now, people around you noticed you seemed calmer, more grounded, less desperate for approval. And honestly, the strangest part was that you barely noticed the transformation while it was happening. Real change rarely feels cinematic in real life. Most of the time, it feels repetitive, ordinary, slow, until one day you suddenly realize your old habits no longer control you the same way they once did. One night, while walking home after dinner with friends, you noticed something unusual. For the first time in years, you did not feel the urge to immediately drown yourself in distraction the moment you got home. The silence no longer frightened you the way it once had. Because you were no longer constantly running from yourself, and maybe that was the real beginning of self-awareness. Not becoming perfect, not eliminating flaws, simply becoming honest enough to see yourself clearly without needing to look away. For a long time, you misunderstood what self-awareness actually meant. You thought becoming more aware of yourself would automatically make you more critical, more ashamed, more disappointed by your flaws. But the opposite slowly became true. The more honestly you observed yourself, the less you hated yourself. Because awareness created understanding. You started realizing that many of your unhealthy habits were not proof that you were weak or broken. They were coping mechanisms, emotional patterns, protective behaviors your mind developed over time to avoid discomfort, rejection, uncertainty, or fear. That did not excuse them, but it explained them. And strangely, explanation created compassion. Not the kind of compassion that allows endless excuses. The mature kind. The kind that says, yes, this part of me needs to change, but I do not need to destroy myself in order to change it. That perspective changed everything. For years, you believed growth required constant self-criticism. You thought discipline came from aggressively pushing yourself harder every day. But eventually, you realized people rarely improve through hatred. Real change usually happens when honesty and responsibility become stronger than avoidance. And once that shift happens, self-improvement stops feeling like punishment. It starts feeling like alignment. Little by little, your life became quieter internally. Not because your problems disappeared, not because you suddenly became perfect, but because you stopped fighting reality constantly. You stopped pretending, stopped hiding from discomfort, stopped escaping into endless distraction every time difficult emotions appeared. And in that honesty, something unexpected happened. You became calmer, not emotionally numb, not detached from life, just calmer. Because there is a certain kind of peace that appears when a person no longer spends all their energy running from themselves. And maybe that is what real self-awareness was always meant to become. Not obsession with flaws, not endless self-analysis, just the ability to sit quietly with yourself without needing to look away.